The Diplomat brought a human bodyguard. The battle lasted 180 years. Part 5. The final decade passed like a dream. Linda spent most of it in and out of medical care. Her body had been pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The wounds from the assassination attempt had healed, but they left her weaker than before. Patricia Lane became her constant companion. Managing treatments and monitoring her declining health. Linda refused full stasis. The medical teams wanted to put her in suspended animation to preserve what remained of her life until the signing ceremony. She rejected the idea completely. "I did not spend 170 years awake just to sleep through the end," she told them. "I want to see every moment. I want to watch it happen." So she watched. From her bed, from her wheelchair, from the observation windows of Concordia Prime, she watched the final negotiations unfold. She watched Crystal Singer Veth and Mistweaver Dawn lead their generations toward a future without war. She watched the last holdouts on both sides finally, reluctantly, accept that the conflict was ending. Ambassador Varth was now the oldest living Ellerin in recorded history. He conducted the final sessions from a hover chair similar to the one Linda used. His voice was thin and his hands trembled, but his mind remained sharp. Every word of the treaty passed through him. Every compromise received his approval. The final document was 847 pages long. It defined borders that had been contested for 12,000 years. It established trade routes and shared resources. It created joint councils and mutual defense agreements. It detailed reparations and apologies and promises never to return to war. Every sentence had cost blood. Every paragraph represented years of patient work. Every page carried the weight of all those who had died to make peace possible. The signing ceremony was scheduled for the first day of year 180. Delegates from across the galaxy traveled to Concordia Prime, which had been rebuilt 12 times during the negotiations. The station was decorated with banners from both the Sharath and Nebulari civilizations. For the first time in 12 millennia, those banners hung side by side without conflict. Linda woke that morning and knew it would be her last day. She could feel it in her bones, in her tired heart, in every cell of her ancient body. The treatments had reached their limit. She had pushed past every boundary nature intended for humans. But nature would not be denied forever. She told no one. This day belonged to peace, not to grief. Patricia Lane helped her dress in her old uniform. It still fit, though Linda's body had shrunk with age. The fabric carried patches from a dozen different missions, medals from Earth and 100 other worlds, and the insignia of the Diplomatic Protection Service. Karen Webb came to push her wheelchair. Karen was over 90 now, nearly as old as Linda had been when the treatments first slowed her aging. Her hair was white and her hands were spotted, but her eyes still held that fierce determination Linda remembered from their first meeting. "Are you ready?" Karen asked. Linda nodded. "I have been ready for 180 years. The ceremony hall was packed. Thousands of delegates filled the seats. Holographic displays broadcast the event to billions of beings across the galaxy. This was the most anticipated moment in galactic history. The war that had defined civilization for 12,000 years was about to end. Linda was carried to a place of honor at the front of the hall. Ambassador Varth sat beside her in his own chair. They looked at each other and did not need words. Everything that needed to be said had been said long ago. Crystal Singer Veth approached the signing table first. She moved with the fluid grace of young crystal, bright and clear. She signed her name on behalf of the Sharath Youth Movement. Mistweaver Dawn came next, a swirl of colorful gases contained in a ceremonial field. The Nebulari signed on behalf of their generation. The elder leaders followed. Some signed reluctantly, with visible pain. Others signed with relief, finally free of a burden they had carried their entire lives. One by one, The names accumulated until only one remained. Ambassador Vorath Shenkai rose from his hover chair. It took all his strength to stand. Linda could see his legs shaking, his whole body trembling with the effort. But he stood because this moment demanded it. He walked to the table. Each step seemed to take forever. The entire hall held its breath. His hand shook as he reached for the signing instrument. The movement was uncertain, wavering. Linda knew he might not complete it. Without thinking, she pushed herself up from her wheelchair. Her body screamed in protest. Every joint ached. Every muscle burned. But she crossed the distance to his side. She placed her hand over his, steadying his grip. Together, their hands moved as one. Together, they signed a treaty that ended 12,000 years of war. The hall erupted in celebration. Cheers rose from every species. Shareth crystal light mixed with nebulary cloud glow in displays of joy that would have been acts of war just one day before. Beings who had been enemies for millennia embraced each other. Linda did not hear any of it. Her world had narrowed to this moment, to this completion of everything she had worked for. She helped Vorath back to his chair and then collapsed into her own. "We did it," Vorath whispered. "Yes," Linda said. "We did." She asked Karin to take her to the observation deck. One last time, she wanted to see the stars. The fireworks outside the station were beautiful. Shareth and nebulary vessels flew in formation for the first time in history, trailing light behind them. The darkness of space was filled with color and celebration. Vorath was brought to her side. They sat together, watching the impossible become real. "Was it worth it?" Linda asked. Her voice was barely audible now. 180 years. Everything we sacrificed. Everything we lost. Was it worth it? Vorath looked at her. His ancient blue eyes held love and respect and a sadness that came from knowing this was goodbye. "You tell me," he said. "You gave more than anyone. You gave everything. Was it worth it?" Linda smiled. She thought about Dennis Hart and all the others who had died. She thought about the family she never had, the normal life she never lived. She thought about every scar, every wound, every sleepless night spent watching for threats. She thought about the 12,000 years of war that would never claim another life. Every day, she said. Every wound. Every year. Yes, it was worth it. She died that night, peacefully, with stars shining through the observation window and the sounds of celebration echoing through the station. Vorath held her hand until the end, and for a long time after. The treaty was officially named the Lindamore Accords. Human bodyguards became standard for all major galactic diplomatic missions. Schools across the galaxy taught her story. Statues were built in her image on worlds she had never visited. In the Amber Nebula, now shared in peace by former enemies, a station was constructed in her honor. It became a place where beings from all species came to learn, to talk, to build friendships that would have been impossible during the war. They called it Moore Station, a place where enemies became friends, a monument to what one human could achieve through stubborn, impossible, beautiful dedication. The war was over. Peace had won, and it all started with a diplomat who brought a human bodyguard. The diplomat brought a human bodyguard. The battle lasted 180 years. Part 4. The youth movements on both sides grew rapidly. Crystal Singer Veth led the Shareth, peace faction with passion and intelligence that reminded Linda of herself when she was young. Among the Nebulari, a being called Mistweaver Dawn emerged as the voice of a generation that had never known battle. Together, they pushed their elders toward compromise in ways that 90 years of negotiation had failed to achieve. Linda watched this new generation with something close to wonder. She had spent her life protecting a peace process that moved at a glacial pace. Now these young ones were accelerating everything. What took decades before now took years. What took years now took months. Ambassador Vorath was dying. The Ellerons could not extend their lives the way humans could. His treatments only managed his decline. He had perhaps 20 years left, maybe less. Linda could see it in the way he moved, the way he paused between words, the way his blue skin had faded to a pale gray. She was 118 years old biologically. The treatments had kept her alive, far beyond any natural human lifespan, but the cost was visible. She was ancient by any measure. Her hands shook sometimes. Her eyes were not as sharp. She still fought when necessary, but she knew her limits now. A medical officer named Patricia Lane arrived at Concordia Prime in year 112. She was a specialist in extended human lifespans, sent by Earth to monitor Linda's condition. Patricia was young, barely 30, with wonder in her eyes when she first saw the legendary human who had protected peace for over a century. "I read about you in school," Patricia admitted during their first examination. "They teach about you on Earth now." The sergeant who became a shadow. Linda sat patiently while Patricia ran her scans. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to do my job. Your job has lasted longer than most civilizations. How do you do it? How do you keep going?" Linda thought about the question. She thought about Dennis Hart dying in her arms. She thought about the countless scars on her body. She thought about all the years spent standing behind Ambassador Vorath while history unfolded one painful sentence at a time. "It became mine," Linda finally said. "The mission. The cause. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being an assignment and became my purpose. I could not walk away any more than I could stop breathing." Patricia looked at her with an expression that mixed admiration and sadness. She saw what the mission had cost Linda: the isolation, the sacrifice, the giving of her entire human life to something larger than herself. The peace treaty was taking its final shape. 847 pages of agreements, definitions, boundaries, and promises. Every word had been fought over. Every paragraph represented decades of work. The document would end the war that had lasted 12,000 years, but the old guard on both sides was not ready to surrender. The ancient Sharath who remembered the early battles, the elder Nebulari who had lost family to crystal blades, these beings could not imagine a galaxy without their eternal conflict. Peace was not just an end to war for them. It was an erasure of their entire identity. They planned one final massive assassination attempt. The target was not just Ambassador Vorath. They wanted to eliminate everyone who threatened the war. The ambassador, Linda, Karen Webb, Crystal Singer Veth, Mistweaver Dawn, and every leader of the youth peace movements. The attack came during a celebration, marking the 160th year of negotiations. All the targets were gathered in the main hall of Concordia Prime. Music played. Delegates from 100 worlds mingled. For once, the station felt almost joyful. Linda sensed something wrong before the attack began. It was instinct built over 160 years of survival. She noticed guards who moved wrong. She spotted faces that did not belong. She saw hands reaching for hidden weapons. Down. She screamed, throwing herself at Ambassador Vorath. The world exploded into chaos. Energy weapons fired from multiple positions. Crystalline blades flew through the air. Nebulari assassins released toxic clouds. It was a coordinated assault from every direction at once. Linda could not stop it alone. She was too old, too slow. A blade caught her side as she shielded Vorath. Blood soaked through her uniform, but she was not alone. She had never been alone. Karen Webb, now elderly herself but still fierce, cut down 2 attackers before they could reach Crystal Singer Veth. Commander Scott Palmer, Earth's official envoy and great-grandson of humans who had grown up hearing stories of Concordia Prime, led a team of young guards to protect the doors. Dozens of protectors that Linda had trained over the decades moved as one, forming a shield around the peace leaders. The battle lasted 7 minutes. It felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, the assassins were defeated. The old guard had thrown everything they had at the peace process and failed. Crystal Singer Veth and Mistweaver Dawn were alive, shaken but unharmed. Ambassador Vorth had a minor wound on his arm. Linda Moore lay on the floor in a pool of her own blood. Patricia Lane rushed to her side, medical kit in hand. The wound was deep. The blade had pierced her old body in ways that would have killed any normal human instantly. But Linda was not normal. She had survived worse. She would survive this too, if barely. They carried her to the medical bay. Machines worked to repair the damage. Patricia stayed at her bedside for 3 days, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. Ambassador Vorth came to visit when Linda finally woke. He sat beside her bed in his hover chair, too weak to stand. They looked at each other, two ancient beings who had given everything for a cause larger than themselves. "The treaty will be signed in 10 years, Vorth said. His voice was barely a whisper. "The attack has broken the back of the resistance. Even the most stubborn elders now see that the war must end. We are almost there, Linda. Almost." Linda tried to smile, but it hurt too much. 10 more years. Yes, 10 more years. And then we will have done what no one believed possible. We will have ended the longest war in galactic history. Linda closed her eyes. 10 more years. She could do 10 more years. She had to. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me I will live to see it. Promise me I will be there when they sign that treaty." Vorth reached out and took her hand in his thin blue fingers. His grip was weak, but his voice was strong. "I promise," he said. "We will see it together. Both of us, or neither of us. We started this together. We will finish it together." Linda squeezed his hand and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Real, genuine hope that the end was finally in sight. 10 more years. After 170, what was 10 more? She could do it. She would do it. Nothing would stop her now. The Diplomat brought a human bodyguard. The battle lasted 180 years. Part 3. Ambassador Vorth survived, but he was never the same. The explosion had damaged his lungs and weakened his heart. He walked slower now, rested more often, and sometimes forgot where he was in the middle of a sentence. But he refused to abandon the mission. He returned to the negotiation table as soon as the medical teams allowed. CONCORDIA Prime was rebuilt. The negotiations resumed. The Sheriff and Nebulari acted as if nothing had happened, though both sides denied responsibility for the bombing. Linda knew better. The Watcher had been right. The attack came from outside interests who wanted the war to continue forever. Years passed like water through her fingers. Linda was 42 years old biologically, though she had lived 52 years in total. The life extension treatment slowed her aging to a crawl. She watched herself in the mirror sometimes, amazed that she looked almost the same as she had a decade ago. The negotiations became legendary across the galaxy. News reporters called it the Endless Summit. Historians wrote papers about the stubborn Elleran Diplomat and his human bodyguard who simply refused to quit. Scholars traveled to Concordia Prime just to observe, to try to understand what drove these two individuals to dedicate their lives to something that seemed impossible. Linda stopped counting the assassination attempts after number 20. They came from everywhere. Sharath crystals hidden in walls. Nebulary gases pumped through ventilation systems. Hired killers from a dozen different species. Poison blades, explosives, radiation. Every method that existed was tried at least once. She survived them all. She collected scars like some people collected memories. In year 38, the convoy carrying supplies to Concordia Prime was ambushed. Dennis Hart led the defense team. He held the line long enough for the supplies to reach the station, but he took a plasma bolt to the chest during the final push. Linda was at his side when he died. He was 79 years old, gray-haired and wrinkled in a way she would never be. He had stayed on Concordia Prime for 34 years, watching her back, offering quiet advice, being the closest thing she had to family. "You keep going," Dennis said with his last breath. "Promise me." "I promise," Linda whispered. She buried him in the station's garden, beneath the small trees that grew under artificial light. She said no words at the funeral. There was nothing to say. She simply stood alone with a bottle of earth, whiskey, and drank until the pain became bearable. A young woman arrived on the station 2 months later. Her name was Karen Webb, and she was Dennis Hart's protege. She was 25 years old, with fierce eyes and quick hands. She had trained her entire life for this assignment. "Captain Hart spoke about you often," Karen said when they first met. "He said you were the most dedicated soldier he had ever known." Linda studied the young woman. She saw determination there and hunger to prove herself. "This is not a normal assignment," Linda warned. "People die here. The mission lasts decades, maybe centuries. Are you prepared for that?" Karen nodded without hesitation. "Captain Hart gave his life for this mission. I intend to honor that sacrifice." Linda began training her. She taught Karen everything she knew about protecting a diplomat in hostile territory. How to spot hidden weapons. How to read body language across a dozen different species. How to stay alert for hours without rest. How to survive poison, explosion, and betrayal. The years continued their slow march. By year 60, Linda had prevented 47 assassination attempts. The Sheriff and Nebulari had both tried to kill her directly 12 times. She had scars on every part of her body. She had broken bones that healed and muscles that tore and reformed. But progress happened too. Slowly, painfully, word by word, the peace treaty grew. The Amber Nebula was finally declared a shared resource zone. Both species would have access. Neither would control it exclusively. It had only taken 60 years. Ambassador Vorath wept when the agreement was signed. Linda had never seen an Ellerin cry before. Their tears were a pale blue color that evaporated quickly in the station's recycled air. "We are not finished," Vorath said, wiping his eyes. "But we are closer than anyone has ever been." Linda allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Then she returned to watching for threats. Around this time, she finally learned who was funding most of the assassination attempts. The Watcher had mentioned a network of war profiteers, but the leader of that network remained hidden for decades. His name was the Broker. He was a creature of unknown species who had grown wealthy selling weapons to both the Sheriff and Nebulari for thousands of years. Peace meant the end of his business. Linda tracked him for 3 years, following financial trails and information leaks. Karen helped her, using skills that Dennis had taught and Linda had refined. Finally, they found him on a small moon orbiting a dead world. The confrontation was brief. The Broker had guards, but he had grown complacent after centuries of operating in shadows. He did not expect a human to find him. He did not expect her to be so fast despite her apparent age. Linda looked at him when it was over. He was dying, leaking strange fluids from wounds she had inflicted. "You cannot stop the war," he gasped. "Someone else will take my place. There is too much money to be made." "Maybe," Linda said, "but you will not see it." She left him there and returned to Concordia Prime. Year 90 arrived. Linda was biologically 78 years old. Her hair had finally turned fully gray. Her joints ached in the mornings. The life extension treatments kept her alive and functional, but they could not restore her youth. Karen Webb was now 57, approaching middle age herself. She had taken the same treatments Linda had. The mission demanded it. Ambassador Vorath was ancient by Elleran standards. He conducted negotiations from a special chair because he could no longer stand for long periods. His memory sometimes failed, but his commitment never wavered. The three of them had become something more than colleagues. They were partners. They were family. 90 years of shared sacrifice had bound them together in ways that words could not describe. Then something unexpected happened. A new faction emerged among the Sharath and Nebulari. These were young members of both species who had grown up in the ceasefire zones that the negotiations had created. They had never personally fought in the war. They had never killed or been wounded. They knew the war only as a distant concept, something their grandparents talked about. These young ones wanted peace. Not in another 100 years. Not after more decades of negotiation. They wanted it now, and they were willing to force both sides to the table. A young Sharath named Crystal Singer-Veth approached Linda one day. Her crystal form was clear and bright, not yet clouded by age. "You have protected the peace process for 90 years, Crystal Singer-Veth said. "My generation has watched you. We have learned from your dedication. Now we want to help." Linda looked at this young Sharath, who spoke of peace without any trace of the contempt Lord Christeth had shown so long ago. Something inside her chest loosened, some tension she had carried for 9 decades. "Then help," Linda said. "We need all the allies we can get." The final phase was about to begin. The Diplomat brought a human bodyguard. The battle lasted 180 years. Part 2. 3 years passed on Concordia Prime. The negotiations continued day after day, month after month, with no real progress. The Sharath and Nebulari argued over every word. They debated the meaning of territory. They debated the definition of peace. They debated whether debates were even useful. Ambassador Vorath guided each session with patience that seemed endless. Linda Moore stood behind him every single time. Her arm had healed, but the scar remained. It was the first of many she would collect in the years to come. She had stopped 2 more assassination attempts since that first day. One was a poison meant for the ambassador's water. The other was a Nebulari operative who tried to suffocate Vorath by filling his quarters with toxic gas. Linda had dragged the ambassador to safety while her own lungs burned. The galaxy began to notice. Reports spread about the Elleran diplomat and his human bodyguard who refused to die. Some called it foolish. Others called it impressive. Most did not understand why she stayed. Linda asked herself that question sometimes during the long nights when she could not sleep. She had no family waiting for her on Earth. Her parents had died before she joined the military. She had a brother somewhere, but they had not spoken in years. The mission had become her life, and she was not sure how she felt about that dot in the 4th year. A ship arrived carrying Captain Dennis Hart. He was a military advisor sent by Earth Command to evaluate the situation. He was 45 years old with gray at his temples and a calm way of looking at problems. He met with Linda in the station's small garden, one of the few places where green things grew. "Command wants a report," Dennis said. "They want to know if this mission is worth continuing. Resources are limited. They could assign you elsewhere." Linda looked at the small trees that grew under artificial sunlight. "What do you think?" Dennis was quiet for a moment. "I think you have been here for 4 years, and they have not made any real progress. I think the Sharath and Nebulari do not want peace. I think you could spend your whole life here and nothing would change. You might be right. So, why stay?" Linda thought about the question. She remembered the blade cutting through her arm. She remembered dragging Vorath through poisonous gas while her vision went dark. She remembered the look in Lord Krista's eyes when he threatened her with millennia of patience. "Because someone has to," she finally said. "Because if everyone gives up, nothing ever changes." The Sharath and Nebulari have been fighting for 12,000 years. Maybe they need to see what real commitment looks like. Dennis nodded slowly. He did not argue. Instead, he sent his report to Earth Command and then requested a transfer to Concordia Prime. He stayed. The years continued to pass. In year 6, Ambassador Vorath called Linda to a private meeting. He looked troubled, which was unusual for the calm Ellerin diplomat. "I must discuss something difficult with you." "Sergeant Moore." Linda waited. "You are aware that humans have shorter lifespans than most galactic species. You are now 38 years old. If these negotiations continue for decades, which they likely will, you will grow old and die before we finish. The Ellerin Council has offered a solution." He placed a small case on the table and opened it. Inside were several vials of blue liquid. These are life extension treatments. They are experimental, but have shown promising results. They will slow your aging significantly. You could live for centuries, perhaps longer. The choice is yours. Linda stared at the vials. Living for centuries had never been something she imagined. Humans were not meant to live that long. They were meant to burn bright and fade quickly, leaving room for the next generation. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked. "Then you will age normally. You will eventually be replaced by a younger guard. The mission will continue without you. Continue without her." The thought bothered her more than she expected. She had given 6 years to this mission. She had bled for it. The idea of walking away, of letting someone else take her place, felt like failure. "I need time to think," she said. That night, she used the station's communication system to contact Earth. After hours of waiting, her brother's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than she remembered. Gray hair, tired eyes. He did not recognize her at first. "Linda? Is that really you?" "Hello, Gary." They talked for an hour. Gary told her about his life on Earth. He had married, had children, gotten divorced. Their mother had died 3 years ago from a sudden illness. Linda had not known. She had been on Concordia Prime, standing behind a diplomat, watching for threats. "She asked about you before she passed," Gary said. "She was proud of you. Whatever you are doing out there, she said you must be doing something important." Linda ended the call with tears in her eyes. She sat alone in her quarters and looked at the stars through the small window. Her mother was gone. Her brother barely knew her anymore. Earth felt like a distant memory dub the next morning. She went to Ambassador Vorath and took the first treatment. The effects were gradual. Her body healed faster. Her reflexes sharpened. The gray that had started to appear in her hair faded away. She was not immortal, but she was no longer bound by a human lifetime. Dennis Hart noticed the change. "You did it," he said without judgment. "You committed to this for the long run." "Someone has to," Linda repeated. By year 10, she had stopped 3 more assassination attempts. The Sharath and Nebulari had started calling her the Persistent Shadow. They meant it as an insult, but Linda wore the name with pride. Then something unexpected happened. After a decade of arguing, both sides agreed to a temporary ceasefire in one small sector of the Amber Nebula. It was a tiny victory. One small patch of space where the fighting would stop. But it was the first ceasefire in 8,000 years. The celebration on Concordia Prime was quiet but real. Ambassador Vorath allowed himself a rare smile. Linda permitted herself a single drink of Earth whiskey that Dennis had brought from home. That night, a stranger appeared in the corridor outside Linda's quarters. The figure was tall and wore a hood that concealed their face. They seemed to exist at the edge of shadows, never fully visible. "Who are you?" Linda demanded, her hand on her weapon. "I am called the Watcher," the figure said. "I have observed these negotiations since they began. I have seen diplomats come and go. I have seen assassins succeed and fail. but I have never seen anyone like you. Human, what do you want?" The Watcher's voice was cold. "I want you to understand what you face. The war between the Sheriff and Nebulari feeds 1,000 worlds. Arms dealers, fuel merchants, medical suppliers, mercenary armies. Entire economies depend on this conflict continuing forever. Those interests will not let you succeed. Today's ceasefire is a threat to their profits. They will respond." Linda gripped her weapon tighter. "Is that a threat?" "It is a warning. The assassination attempts you have faced came from the Sheriff and Nebulari themselves. What comes next will come from everywhere else." The Watcher faded into the shadows and was gone. Linda stood alone in the corridor, heart pounding. The next morning, an explosion tore through the negotiation wing. Fire and debris filled the air. Alarms screamed. Linda ran through the chaos, searching for the ambassador. She found Vorath trapped under a fallen beam, blue blood pooling beneath him. He was alive but badly hurt. Linda lifted the beam with strength she did not know she had. She carried him through the burning wreckage, through smoke and flame, until they reached the medical bay. 10 years of work had nearly ended in seconds. But they were still alive. The mission continued. As medical teams worked to save the ambassador. Linda looked at the burning station through the observation window. The Watcher was right. The real enemies were just beginning to show themselves. She was ready. The Diplomat brought a human bodyguard. The battle lasted 180 years. Part 1. The space station, called Concordia Prime, floated in the darkness between 3 star systems. It was a neutral place where species from across the galaxy came to talk instead of fight. Ambassador Vara Shenkai stood at the observation window and watched a transport ship approach. His blue skin reflected the starlight as he waited. The Elleran Diplomat had served his people for 200 years, but he had never requested something like this before. He had asked for a human bodyguard. His assistant, a young Elleran named Mirith, stood behind him with confusion on her face. She did not understand why the ambassador would want a human. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only been part of the Galactic Assembly for 80 years. They were small, weak, and they lived such short lives. What could a human possibly offer that a trained Elleran guard could not? Vorath seemed to read her thoughts. He spoke without turning from the window. "You are wondering why I chose a human, Mirith." "Yes, Ambassador. I mean no disrespect, but humans are fragile creatures. They break easily. They age quickly. They are not built for long missions." Vorath smiled slightly. "You see their weaknesses. I see something else. I see a species that refuses to accept when something is impossible. I have studied humans carefully. They are the most stubborn creatures in the known galaxy. When a human decides to protect something, they do not stop. They do not give up. They will die before they abandon their duty." The transport ship docked with a soft thump that vibrated through the station. Vorath turned from the window and walked toward the arrival bay. His long robes flowed behind him like water. Mirith followed, still uncertain. The airlock opened and Sergeant Linda Moore stepped onto Concordia Prime for the first time. She was 32 years old, with short brown hair and eyes that had seen combat. She wore the simple uniform of Earth's Diplomatic Protection Service. A scar ran along her left forearm from a mission she never talked about. She carried one bag over her shoulder and a sidearm on her hip. She saluted the ambassador with the human military gesture. "Sergeant Linda Moore reporting for duty, sir." Vorath studied her for a moment. She was shorter than him by nearly a full meter. She looked tired from the long journey, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She was already scanning the corridor for threats, checking the corners, noting the exits. Good. She understood. "Welcome to Concordia Prime, Sergeant Moore. I am Ambassador Vara Shenkai. You have been assigned to protect me during the Amber Nebula Peace Summit. Linda nodded. I read the briefing on the way here, Ambassador. Two species called the Sharath and the Nebulari have been fighting for 12,000 years over some territory. You are trying to negotiate a ceasefire. Seems straightforward. Morath began walking, and Linda fell into step beside him, positioning herself between the ambassador and any open doorways. He noticed this and approved. It is not straightforward, Sergeant. This conflict has outlasted empires. It has survived the rise and fall of 100 civilizations. The Sharath and the Nebulari do not remember why they started fighting. They only know that they must continue. Their entire cultures are built around this war. Their economies depend on it. Their religions celebrate it. They entered a large meeting hall. Holographic displays showed maps of the Amber Nebula, a vast region of space filled with rare minerals and energy sources. Both species claimed it as their sacred homeland. Linda studied the maps. If they have been fighting this long, why do they want peace now? They do not want peace, Boris said quietly. The Galactic Assembly is forcing them to negotiate. The war has begun to affect trade routes and neutral worlds. The Assembly has grown tired of it. But the Sharath and Nebulari are only here because they must be. They will do everything they can to make these negotiations fail. Linda turned to look at him directly. Then why accept this mission? If they do not want peace, you cannot force them to agree. Morath sat down at the head of the long table. He looked very old suddenly, though Elrons could live for centuries. 7 diplomats have tried to negotiate peace between these species, Sergeant. All 7 were assassinated. The Sharath killed 3. The Nebulari killed 3. 1 was killed by parties unknown. I do not intend to be the 8th. Linda understood now why she was here. This was not a simple protection assignment. This was a survival mission. I should meet the delegations, she said. The Sharath arrived first. They were beings made of living crystal, their bodies geometric and beautiful in a cold way. Lord Christeth led their delegation. He was ancient, his crystal form clouded with age but still sharp at the edges. He looked at Linda the way someone might look at an insect. The Ellerin brings a human pet, Lord Christus said. His voice sounded like glass scraping against glass. How amusing. Humans live for what, 80 years? Perhaps 90? This negotiation has already lasted longer than her entire species has existed. Linda said nothing. She simply watched him, memorizing his movements, the way his crystal body shifted, where he might hide a weapon. The Nebulari arrived an hour later. They were beings of living gas, clouds of color that shifted and swirled within containment fields. Their leader was called Mistwalker Eon. The Nebulari barely acknowledged anyone in the room. They considered solid beings to be primitive and barely worth noticing. The first negotiation session began that afternoon. High Mediator Trellix, an insectoid being from the Vorn species, presided over the talks. The Vorn were known for their patience and neutrality. They had mediated conflicts for millions of years. The session lasted 6 hours. Nothing was accomplished. The Sharath accused the Nebulari of ancient crimes. The Nebulari accused the Sharath of the same. Morath tried to guide them toward common ground, but there was none to be found. Linda stood behind the ambassador the entire time. She did not move. She did not speak. She watched. That was how she saw the blade. It came from one of the Sharath attendants, a small crystal being who had positioned himself near the wall. The blade was made of the same crystal as his body, invisible until he moved. He threw it with perfect accuracy at Ambassador Vorath's back. Linda did not think. She simply moved. Her body crossed the distance faster than anyone expected. She put her arm in the path of the blade and felt it slice through her flesh. Blood sprayed across the table. The pain was incredible, but she did not cry out. The room erupted in chaos. Guards from all species rushed forward. The Sharath assassin was seized. Lord Christeth expressed outrage that such a thing could happen, though his crystal face showed no real surprise. Linda held her wounded arm and looked at the ambassador. He was safe. That was all that mattered. Medical teams arrived and began treating her wound. It was deep but not fatal. She would heal. As they worked on her arm, Lord Christeth approached. He stood over her, looking down with those cold crystal eyes. "You have made yourself an enemy of the Eternal Shard," he said quietly so only she could hear. "Our patience is measured in millennia. Can your short human life endure what comes next?" Linda looked up at him. Her face was pale from blood loss, but her eyes were steady. "I guess we will find out," she said. Lord Christeth made a sound that might have been laughter. Then he turned and walked away. Linda watched him go. She understood now that this mission would not end quickly. She understood that she had just made enemies who would remember her for 1,000 years. She looked at Ambassador Varath across the room. He met her gaze and nodded once. A silent thank you. A silent acknowledgement that everything had changed. Linda nodded back. Whatever came next, she was ready.